You ever just stop and think about how much of your life is actually, well, online now? I mean, from just scrolling through your social feeds, ordering dinner maybe, managing your bank accounts every single click, every interaction, it leaves this huge digital trail behind. And all that data, your really personal stuff, it isn't just sitting there, is it? It's constantly zipping across borders, interacting with these super complex, often totally visible systems, processed in ways we barely understand. And the big question, the one that kind of keeps me up at night sometimes, is who's really looking after all that information? And how good a job are they actually doing? So today we're embarking on, a crucial deep dive into exactly that question. We're navigating the really complex, constantly shifting world of data privacy and cybersecurity. We'll kick things off by trying to untangle two foundational regulations, Europe's GDPR and Hong Kong's PDPO. We'll compare them, see where they align and where they diverge. Then we'll zoom out a bit, cast a wider net, and explore the dynamic, sometimes pretty fragmented but definitely fast-maturing cybersecurity scene across the entire Asia-Pacific region. It's really a journey into understanding not just the rules themselves, but the thinking behind them, the surprising differences, and the very real, practical challenges of protecting our digital lives globally.
Exactly. And our mission here, as always, is to equip you with those essential nuggets of knowledge. We've dug through a whole range of detailed, authoritative sources for this. We've got insights from a really in-depth comparison by OneTrust Data Guidance, plus critical analyses and reports from big names like Ashurst, SIA Partners, Access Now, CSIS, Access Partnership, and Drew and Napier LLC. We're here to cut through the jargon, pull out those surprising facts, highlight the crucial differences, and really connect the dots for you. Give you a clear, informed picture without drowning you in information. You should walk away with some real aha moments about why these regulations matter so much, both to individuals like us and to the companies we deal with every day.
And as we get into these really critical topics, we definitely want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors. They're the ones who help make these deep dives possible. For those of you listening who are trying to navigate this incredibly complex landscape, maybe you're a CISO fighting those daily battles, or a compliance officer juggling global rules, or maybe you're just intensely curious about how your digital footprint is protected. Well, resources like www.cisomarketplace.com and www.compliancehub.wiki are absolutely essential tools. They help you stay informed, stay resilient, and stay compliant in a world that's just changing so fast. They really offer that kind of practical guidance that cuts through the legal speak and gets right to what you need to know on the ground.
Okay, so where do we even start trying to untangle this global web of data rules? I mean, it feels huge. Often the conversation seems to kick off with two sort of titans in the privacy world: Europe's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and Hong Kong's PDPO, the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. Now, GDPR is widely seen as the gold standard, right? A real global influencer.
But are these two frameworks really singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to protecting your data? Or are there, hidden traps and unexpected differences hiding under the surface?
That's exactly the right question. And what's really fascinating here is that the OneTrust Data Guidance Report gives us this brilliant side-by-side analysis. It even includes a consistency rating for different provisions. This rating goes from consistent down to inconsistent, and it gives us this incredibly useful visual shorthand. It helps you see at a glance how aligned these two major frameworks actually are on specific points. It's more than just a label, though. It really helps us understand not just where the basic data protection ideas are universally accepted, but crucially, where local nuances and different legislative philosophies create these significant gaps in how they actually work in practice. This guide specifically drills down into core stuff like their scope, the definitions they use, which we'll get into, the legal basis needed for processing data, what's expected of controllers and processors, individual rights, and how the laws are enforced.
Okay, so that consistency rating for someone just trying to figure out their rights, or maybe for a company trying to stay compliant, especially if they operate in both Europe and Hong Kong, what does that rating really tell them? What's the practical takeaway from seeing inconsistent versus consistent?
It highlights a really crucial point, one that often gets missed. While the reason behind the laws, the core idea of protecting personal information might seem similar, the application of those principles and the nitty-gritty details can be worlds apart. Really different, and that creates genuine friction. This impacts basically everything from how you handle data day to day, like how you get consent, to the specifics of enforcement actions, the fines you might face, all of it. It fundamentally means organizations just cannot take a simple one-size-fits-all approach. You really, really need to understand these specific differences, to ensure proper compliance, manage the legal risks, and actually respect people's rights in each place. Missing just one inconsistent point it could lead to pretty significant trouble.
Right. That deep dive into the specifics sounds absolutely critical for effective compliance, for managing risk. And for any professionals listening who are grappling with these complex global standards, resources like www.compliancehub.wiki can offer really comprehensive support. Helping track, interpret, and actually implement these evolving requirements. It's about turning that legal text into something you can actually use into strategy. Now, here's where it gets, for me anyway, really interesting and often surprisingly tricky. How do these laws actually define the very data they're trying to protect? You'd think personal data would be a pretty straightforward concept, right? Same everywhere. But I suspect the subtle differences in these definitions could have massive practical effects on what's actually covered.
You're absolutely right to focus on that. Under GDPR, specifically Article 4.1, personal data gets a very broad, very expansive definition. It covers basically anything that can identify a living person. That includes the obvious stuff like a name or an ID number, but it also extends way beyond that to things like your device ID, location data from your phone, online identifiers like tracking cookies, or even factors specific to your physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity. It's designed to be incredibly wide-ranging. PDPO in Section 2.1 has a definition that's slightly more contained. It defines data as information relating directly or indirectly to a living individual from which their identity can be practically ascertained, and importantly, which is in a practicable form for access or processing. That practicable form bit is key. While both laws aim to protect identity, GDPR's language just casts a much wider, more future-proof net. It embraces evolving identifiers that might not be immediately obvious.
That practical full form clause. Sounds subtle, but potentially quite significant. And what about the actual actions taken with that data? What counts as processing? Does just say looking at data count? Or does it have to be something more active, like changing it or sending it somewhere else?
Again, GDPR takes this really comprehensive view. Article 4.2 gives a virtually exhaustive list. It includes collection, recording, organization, structuring, storage, adaptation, alteration, retrieval, consultation use. Disclosure by transmission, dissemination, making available, alignment, combination, restriction, erasure, or destruction. Basically, almost any operation you can possibly perform on data, automated or not, falls under GDPR's definition of processing. This breadth means that the second data is touched, GDPR rules potentially kick in. PDPO, again in Section 2.1, defines processing more narrowly. It talks about amending, augmenting, deleting, or rearranging the data, whether automated or not. Now, this difference might seem subtle on the surface, but it can have really big implications for which specific actions trigger the regulatory rules and how a company has to set up its data handling procedures. For instance, just storing or looking at data might not always be seen as processing under PDPO if nothing gets amended or rearranged. That's a really stark contrast to GDPR.
Right. Now, I've heard a lot, especially around GDPR, about concepts like anonymization and pseudonymization. These sound like absolutely key tools for privacy engineering, right? Letting companies work with data while lowering the risk. Are those concepts also explicitly defined in PDPO? Or does Hong Kong take a different path on this?
This is a really critical point of difference, and OneTrust Data Guidance flags this one as inconsistent. GDPR explicitly defines pseudonymization in Article 4.5. It means processing personal data so it can't be linked back to a specific person without using additional information, and that extra info has to be kept separately and securely. GDPR also refers to anonymous information in Recital 26. That's data that doesn't relate to an identified or identifiable person at all. These explicit definitions are vital tools. They let organizations significantly cut down data risk, maybe even avoid some compliance burdens, while still doing valuable analysis or research. Pseudonymization especially offers this powerful middle ground. PDPO, however, simply doesn't refer to anonymization or pseudonymization anywhere in its legal text. This means companies in Hong Kong might lack those clear legal pathways and the regulatory certainty for de-identifying data that are widely recognized and even encouraged under GDPR. This can create real uncertainty and lead to different operational choices for businesses trying to balance data privacy and innovation. It could potentially hold back certain data-driven projects, actually.
Okay, so once we've figured out what data is covered and what processing means, who's actually responsible for making sure it's all protected and handled properly? Who are these controllers and processors? And what specific obligations do they have? Are they the same under both laws?
Both frameworks have pretty similar basic definitions for the main players. GDPR calls the key decision maker the controller, Article 4.7, while PDPO calls them the data user, Section 2.1. Both terms refer to the entity, the company, the organization that decides the purposes and means of processing personal data. Basically, who's calling the shots. However, it's the specific obligations placed on these controllers or data users and the proactive steps they have to take where we see significant differences. And these differences often get rated inconsistent or fairly inconsistent in that one trust comparison. It's not just semantics, it really shapes how organizations have to build their whole privacy program.
So beyond just the names, what are some of those really significant differences in what's expected of them? Are there like specific tools or roles that GDPR demands but PDPO doesn't? Things that would fundamentally change how a company operates.
Absolutely. GDPR puts a really strong emphasis on proactive compliance and managing risks right from the start. It pushes privacy considerations way upstream in the process. For instance, it mandates data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, under Article 35, for any processing likely to result in a high risk to individuals' rights and freedoms. Think of these as a formal process to identify, assess, and minimize privacy risks before you launch a new product, service, or system that handles personal data in a significant way. It's about embedding privacy by design. Furthermore, GDPR requires many organizations to appoint a data protection officer, or DPO, under Article 31. This applies especially if you process large amounts of data, sensitive data, or systematically monitor people. These DPOs are meant to be independent experts who oversee compliance, advise the company, and act as a contact point for people and regulators. Their job is to make sure privacy is woven into the fabric of the organization. The PDPO, quite differently, doesn't mandate DPIAs or require DPO appointments in the law itself. This represents a really significant difference in the proactive measures and the dedicated internal resources required. GDPR's approach is much more robust in anticipating challenges and pushing for continuous oversight.
Wow, that's a massive difference. It really sounds like GDPR actively forces organizations not just to tick boxes, but to genuinely think about privacy risks up front and embed expert privacy leadership, whereas PDPO maybe allows for a more reactive approach.
Precisely. And another key point of difference is record keeping. GDPR, under Article 31, insists that controllers and processors maintain detailed records of their processing activities. These records need to include things like the controller's contact details, the purposes of the processing, the categories of data subjects, and personal data involved, information about data transfers, security measures. It's quite comprehensive. It creates a clear audit trail demonstrating compliance. There's an exemption for smaller businesses, fewer than 250 employees, but only if the processing isn't risky, involves sensitive data, or isn't just occasional Article 35. PDPO, by contrast, doesn't have any general requirement to maintain such detailed data processing records. This leads to a vastly different approach for showing compliance and transparency. Now, both frameworks do require contracts when a controller or data user uses a third-party processor, but GDPR is very explicit about what needs to be in that contract, detailing the scope, nature, purpose, duration, types of data, security obligations, audit rights, etc., ensuring protection flows down. The PDPO also requires a contract, but the source notes it's much less specific on the required details beyond just needing a contract. This potentially leaves more ambiguity and maybe less robust protection when data is outsourced.
Okay, so data gets collected, processed. But in our connected world, it rarely just stays put, right? What happens when personal data needs to cross international borders? This must be a huge headache, especially with different legal frameworks like GDPR and PDPO involved.
It's a massive challenge, yes. And it's definitely an area where the frameworks are rated as inconsistent by OneTrust data guidance. The GDPR, under Articles 46, 47, and 49.1, provides very clear, quite robust, and often pretty prescriptive mechanisms for international data transfers. The whole point is to ensure data leaving the EU maintains a comparable level of protection. These mechanisms include adequacy decisions from the European Commission. That's where the EU officially says another country's data protection laws are good enough, essentially green-lighting transfers. If there's no adequacy decision, organizations can use pre-approved standard contractual clauses, or SCCs, these are legally binding contracts for transfers, or for internal group transfers, they might use binding corporate rules or BCRs. These are all designed to make sure personal data stays protected to EU standards no matter where it physically goes. They provide a relatively high degree of legal certainty.
And what about PDPO? Is it as prescriptive? Does it have similar safeguards to ensure data is safe when it leaves Hong Kong, especially given its role as a major global financial center?
Not quite, and this is a really significant point to grasp. Section 33 of the PDPO, the part that's actually meant to regulate cross-border data transfers, is not yet operational. Let that sink, and a key part of the framework, intended to deal with global data flows, isn't even active decades after the main law came into effect. Furthermore, even when it does eventually apply, its scope is narrower. It only covers data collected, held, processed, or used in Hong Kong, or controlled by a data user in Hong Kong. The PDPO allows transfers under different conditions. If the data user has reasonable grounds to believe the destination country has a law substantially similar to or serves the same purposes as the PDPO, or alternatively, if the data subject has given specific written consent for the transfer, this is a much less formal, less robust, and frankly more subjective set of mechanisms compared to GDPR's detailed, pre-approved safeguards like SCCs or adequacy decisions.
Wow, the idea of substantially similar sounds like it could be a huge gray area. Very open to interpretation by each company, right? It seems to put an enormous amount of responsibility and maybe legal risk onto the company sending the data to make that judgment call without formal guidance like an adequacy decision. What are the real-world implications of Section 33 still not being operational after all this time and this reliance on a subjective assessment?
It absolutely does put the onus on the company, and it's a stark example of, well, legislative inertia. While the intention for robust transfer rules might be there on paper in Section 33, the practical reality is this prolonged gap. It leaves businesses in a kind of perpetual uncertainty about their data transfer strategies out of Hong Kong. And this isn't just a compliance headache, it's a strategic issue. It forces companies to either maybe over-engineer their Hong Kong operations to avoid transfers, creating silos, or, more worryingly, it could mean individuals' data gets transferred with potentially less rigorous protections simply because the legal framework hasn't fully caught up. It arguably undermines Hong Kong's position as a leading global data hub by creating the significant compliance difference compared to regions like the EU with mature, legally binding transfer mechanisms. It basically shifts the risk assessment burden from regulators onto individual businesses, which can definitely lead to inconsistencies and potential weak spots.
Yeah. Navigating these international data transfers is clearly incredibly complex. It carries significant risks for companies operating globally. For getting current insights into what these global privacy laws mean for moving data across borders and how to actually manage those risks. Resources like www.myprivacy.blog can be really invaluable. Understanding the evolving landscape and finding practical, up-to-date solutions is key. It's a field that just demands constant learning. Okay, so we've peeled back some pretty intricate layers comparing GDPR and PDPO, seeing how even basic concepts can differ quite a lot. Now let's zoom out. Let's look at this huge, really critical area in the digital world, the Asia-Pacific region. What's driving their urgent, but sometimes seemingly fragmented push for better cybersecurity in such a dynamic economic zone? What are the big challenges they're up against?
The Asia-Pacific region is, it's a fascinating and critically important case study in digital transformation right now. As the Access Partnership Report points out, it's home to some of the world's fastest-growing digital economies. Think about the explosion in e-commerce, digital services, smart city projects across places like Singapore, South Korea, even emerging markets. But this rapid digital growth is proving to be a real double-edged sword. While it's fueling amazing economic growth, the region is simultaneously becoming one of the most targeted areas for cyber attacks globally. So governments all across Asia-Pacific are actively realizing that cybersecurity isn't just a tech problem anymore. It's a critical national priority. It's core to national security, economic stability, even geopolitics now.
Wow, that sounds like this constant high-stakes race. Innovation versus defense. You've got rapid digital growth colliding head-on with escalating threats. What specific kinds of threats are we talking about? What's so prevalent and worrying in that region particularly?
Well, we're seeing a significant rise in what are called advanced persistent threats, or APTs. These aren't your run-of-the-mill hacks. They're sophisticated long-term cyber attacks, often backed by nation-states with serious resources and strategic goals. For example, the report mentions the Andariel Group linked to North Korea, implicated in targeted attacks against organizations holding military secrets and critical tech. That shows a clear geopolitical angle to cybersecurity there. These are highly organized, well-funded campaigns. They're aiming for espionage, stealing intellectual property, or maybe just causing disruption and destabilization. And think about this. There are an estimated 14 billion IoT devices, Internet of Things, smart sensors, connected appliances, everything expected in the region by 2025. That just exponentially expands the potential attack surface. Every one of those devices is a potential way in for sophisticated attackers.
14 billion devices. That's just staggering. And the threat level sounds incredibly high. So given the scale of the problem and how interconnected the region is becoming digitally, Are the governments there coordinating effectively? Are they working together to tackle these common threats, or is it more like each country doing its own thing in a silo?
That's where it gets really challenging, and the Access Partnership source specifically points to a fragmented response. Now, countries like Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, they've made definite progress. They've got breach reporting rules, regulatory reforms happening. Singapore's Cybersecurity Act, for instance, mandates breach reporting for critical sectors. But diverse national priorities have undeniably slowed down efforts to create a truly unified regional defense. For example, Vietnam has a strong focus on data localization, wanting certain data kept within its borders, often citing national security. Indonesia also has limits on cross-border data flows, driven by similar worries about data sovereignty. These nationalistic approaches, while maybe understandable from a government's perspective, can inadvertently create silos. They make regional intelligence sharing harder and coordinating a defense against common cross-border cyber threats much more difficult. It's that classic tension, isn't it? National interests versus collective security.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Different countries, different priorities, unique histories. But even with that fragmentation, are there any overarching regional efforts, initiatives trying to bring some common ground, some shared principles for data protection and cybersecurity? Is an organization like ASEAN actually making a difference here?
Yes, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has definitely been working on several frameworks to try and foster more cooperation, although their real-world impact can vary. You've got the ASEAN Framework on Personal Data Protection, the PDP framework from back in 2016, and the ASEAN Framework on Digital Data Governance, the DDG framework from 2018. Both of these aim to encourage a common set of principles for handling data across the member states, recognizing that some level of harmony is needed. On the cybersecurity side, the ASEAN Cybersecurity Cooperation Strategy, which ran 2017-2020, led to setting up an ASEAN Regional Computer Emergency Response Team, a regional CERT. The idea is to improve coordination and incident response between the national CERTs. However, and this is a really crucial limitation, the PDP framework is non-binding. Individual nations aren't legally forced to adopt its principles. Similarly, things like the ASEAN Model Contractual Clauses for Cross-Border Data Flows, MCCs, are voluntary. That's a huge contrast to the legally binding nature of, say, the EU's standard contractual clauses. So, while there's clearly a push for common standards and cooperation, the actual legal teeth and uniform rollout across member states can be pretty patchy. That leads back to the fragmentation we were talking about.
Okay, let's zoom in on a very recent, very significant development right in the heart of this region, Hong Kong's new cybersecurity law. I'm hearing it's not just a minor tweak, but a major piece of legislation for the city, and it's kicking in pretty soon.
Indeed, this is a very timely and really impactful development. Both Ashurst and SIA partners flagged this as significant. On March 19th, 2025, the Hong Kong Legislative Council passed the Protection of Critical Infrastructure Computer System Ordinance. It's now set to officially come into effect on January 1st, 2026. And this move is explicitly designed to bring Hong Kong more firmly in line with global trends. We're seeing increased regulatory focus on cybersecurity and operational resilience everywhere. Think Australia, the EU with NIS2, the UK. This really signals Hong Kong's serious commitment to protecting its vital digital backbone.
That sounds like a big step. So what exactly counts as critical infrastructure under this new law? Is it just government stuff, or does it reach into private companies that are essential for the city's economy and daily life?
It definitely extends beyond just government systems, covering crucial private sector operations too. The ordinance defines critical infrastructure, or CI, in two main categories. Category 1 includes systems needed for delivering what they call essential services. This covers critical sectors like energy, IT, banking and finance, transport, air, land, sea, health services, and telecoms and broadcasting. Basically, services where disruption would cause immediate severe problems. Category 2 covers infrastructure that's vital for maintaining other critical societal or economic activities. Examples given are major sports venues and R&D parks. Things that aren't maybe life-sustaining minute to minute, but are still indispensable for Hong Kong's overall functioning. It is worth noting, though, that some government-run essential services like water supply and emergency relief are explicitly excluded, apparently because they fall under separate existing government security rules.
Okay, so who within these critical sectors is the law actually targeting? How does a company know if it's going to be effective, if it's going to be subject to these new, presumably quite strict regulations?
The law targets entities called critical infrastructure operators, or CIOs, and their critical computer systems, or CCS. CIOs are specific organizations designated as operating these CIs. The designation process looks at several factors: how much the infrastructure relies on computer systems, how sensitive the digital data is that the organization handles for that infrastructure, and how much control the organization actually has over operating it. It's a holistic view. CCS, on the other hand, refers to specific designated computer systems that are absolutely essential to a CI's core function, meaning if that particular system gets interrupted or damaged, it would significantly mess up the normal running of the essential service or the CIO's operations. And computer system is defined broadly here: hardware, software, data, networks, even cloud services, regardless of whether they're physically located inside or outside Hong Kong. It's meant to cover the whole digital ecosystem supporting its critical services.
Right. And who actually does the designating? Who decides which company's a CIO and which system is a CCS? And crucially, is this information going to be public? Because that really affects transparency, doesn't it?
That's a very important point, and they're taking a specific approach here. The designation of CIOs and CCS will be handled by a commissioner or specific designated authorities. Right now, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, HKMA, and the Office of the Communications Authority, OFCA, have been named as designated authorities. Apparently, no others are expected currently. The government expects to start these designations from mid-2026, rolling them out in phases. Now, crucially, and this is perhaps a bit controversial, that the designations themselves will not be disclosed to the public. This confidentiality is interesting. It likely means organizations will only find out they're considered critical through a direct private notification, not via some public list. This could impact wider market awareness and transparency, which is definitely a different approach than some other places take.
Okay, so let's say a company gets that private notification. You are now a designated CIO. What kind of obligations kick in then? Are there specific actions or standards they absolutely have to meet under this new law?
Once they're designated, the specific detailed obligations for CIOs will be laid out in codes of practice. These will be issued by the commissioner or the designated authorities like HKMA or OFCA. Now, while these codes won't have the same full statutory force of law as the ordinance itself, they are incredibly important. Why? Because crucially, they may be admissible as evidence in court in relevant legal proceedings. So, while failing to follow a code isn't a direct crime in itself, it could be used to help prove negligence or a breach of duty if something goes wrong and ends up in court. The government has been clear that these codes will focus primarily on protecting the critical infrastructure itself. They've specifically said the codes are not intended to cover or require the transfer of personal data or trade secrets. The focus is squarely on operational resilience and keeping services running. They will set up best practices for things like securing cross-border data flows related to the CI, overall data security within the critical systems, and how to handle statutory data requests properly. So while maybe not law in the strictest sense, these codes will provide concrete, essentially enforceable guidance that CIOs will absolutely be expected to follow very closely.
That's a subtle but really important point about the codes of practice having teeth in court. Now, given how connected everything is digitally, will this new Hong Kong law have any impact beyond Hong Kong's borders? Say, if a designated CIO uses cloud infrastructure or has data processing operations outside of Hong Kong?
That's a very sharp question. Extraterritoriality is always complex with digital laws. The official line from the government is that the ordinance will not have extraterritorial effect in its enforcement. It's explicitly focused on regulating CIOs located in Hong Kong. So the direct regulatory power stops at the border, technically. However, and this is the subtle but critical part, global companies need to catch CIOs are required to produce information that they have access to within Hong Kong, even if that information is physically stored outside Hong Kong. So imagine a Hong Kong-based CIO using a cloud provider in, say, Singapore or the US. If they can access the data related to their critical system from their Hong Kong office, they could be legally compelled by the Hong Kong authorities to produce that data. This means while the law isn't directly enforced on foreign entities or operations, it can compel a Hong Kong-based CIO to pull data back from its international operations if access is possible from within Hong Kong. This has pretty profound implications for how global companies structure their operations and data governance, especially if they get designated as a CIO. They'll need to think very carefully about their global data footprint in light of these local access requirements.
Yeah, keeping up with these evolving regional rules like Hong Kong's new law, it really is a full-time job for compliance and security teams. That's exactly why professional platforms, like the ones offered by www.cisomarketplace.com, are so vital. They give CSOs, compliance officers, legal teams the tools to continuously monitor these changes and really understand the practical impact. These aren't just nice-to-haves. They're becoming essential for turning regulatory updates into actual workable security strategies. Okay, so Hong Kong's new law sounds quite specific, prescriptive, government-enforced, really zeroed in on critical infrastructure. How does that approach stack up against other major players in the Asia-Pacific region or even globally? Are we seeing everyone move in the same direction, or is it more like a patchwork quilt of different strategies?
We're definitely seeing more of a fascinating patchwork quilt, absolutely. Different strategies reflecting different national priorities, different legal traditions. The CIA Partners report highlights a key contrast right away between Hong Kong's approach and, say, the EU's NIS2 directive. Hong Kong's law is pretty prescriptive. It tends to lay out specific, detailed requirements that designated organizations must follow with direct government enforcement. It's more of a you must do X, Y, and Z model. That differs quite significantly from the EU's NIS2 directive, which generally adopts a more flexible, risk-based approach. NIS2 allows companies more leeway to tailor their security measures based on their own assessment of the risks they face, rather than just following a strict checklist. It's more about you must achieve this security outcome, and here are the principles to guide you. Plus, NIS2 is part of this broader cross-border EU strategy. It aims to lift cybersecurity levels across multiple sectors and all member states, fostering a common security culture. Hong Kong's law seems more localized, focusing intensely on specific critical sectors within the city itself.
Right. What about other key countries in Asia? Singapore, for instance, is often held up as being right at the forefront of digital regulation and cybersecurity in the region. How are they adjusting their own rules?
Singapore, yeah, they're definitely very proactive, constantly tweaking and strengthening their defenses. They amended their Cybersecurity Act just recently, in May 2024. This significantly expanded the oversight powers of their cybersecurity agency, the CSA. The whole point of the amendment was to further boost the resilience of their critical information infrastructure, or CII, keeping pace with the changing threat landscape and new technologies. This includes giving the CSA powers to conduct audits, inspections, and even issue direct orders to CII owners if needed. Similarly, Brunei Darussalam has its own comprehensive Cybersecurity Act. This grants pretty broad and powerful authority to their commissioner. We're talking powers to issue specific directions to CI owners to deal with threats, make them comply with codes of practice, force them to appoint cybersecurity auditors, even make them participate in mandatory cybersecurity drills. The Brunei Commissioner can also investigate incidents, demand fixes, and require information. It shows a really robust, government-led approach to protecting critical infrastructure there, too.
In South Korea, they're such a global tech giant, leaders in innovation. Their approach to cybersecurity must be pretty advanced, maybe even something others are looking at.
South Korea's 2024 cyber strategy, as CSIS outlines it, it definitely shows a comprehensive, highly advanced, and quite forward-looking strategy. It hits several key areas. First, protecting public data on digital government platforms using a zero-trust security model. This isn't just a buzzword for them, it's a fundamental shift. Zero trust assumes no connection, user, or device is automatically trustworthy, even if it's inside the network. So continuous, strict verification is mandated everywhere. Second, they're really emphasizing enhancing ICT supply chain security, designating trustworthy suppliers, which is critical in today's world. Third, creating a cyber risk management system to improve and standardize cyber governance across both public and private sectors. Fourth, they're investing heavily in developing quantum-resistant encryption, really future-proofing against that next generation of code-breaking threats. And crucially, they're promoting public-private data sharing platforms to unify the national response to big cyber attacks, even looking at mobilizing private sector expertise when needed. And importantly, they stress improving the cybersecurity workforce, specialized education, talent development, recognizing that the tech alone isn't enough. You need the skilled people too.
It certainly sounds like many countries are taking decisive, sometimes really innovative steps to strengthen their digital defenses. But in this rush for national cybersecurity, what about the potential downsides? Are there human rights concerns being raised, especially with these very broad powers being given to state authorities? It feels like a very delicate balance to strike.
That's an absolutely critical question, and it's one that Access Now, the global nonprofit focused on digital rights, has raised very sharply in their legal analysis of Cambodia's draft law on cybersecurity. They express really serious concerns. They criticize its vague and overbroad terms and the overbroad powers it would grant to Cambodia's proposed Digital Security Committee, DSC, and its cybersecurity inspectors. These proposed powers are incredibly extensive. They include the authority to investigate, observe, monitor people's digital activities, prevent and respond respond to threats, check and seize evidence, and compel individuals to provide information or help investigations. Access Now warns that if this draft law gets adopted as it is, it could lead to arbitrary interference with fundamental rights like privacy and freedom of expression. They point to disproportionately harsh criminal penalties, even for potentially minor offenses, and a worrying lack of independent oversight or effective ways to appeal decisions. This really highlights that delicate balance we need between legitimate national security goals and protecting individual liberties in cybersecurity laws. It's a point of intense international debate. How do you design tools to protect a nation without them potentially being misused against its own citizens if the safeguards aren't strong enough?
What about some of the other established economies in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam? How are they tackling cybersecurity and privacy within their own national rules? Are we seeing similar patterns there or unique approaches too?
We see varied but definitely robust developments happening there as well. Indonesia, for example, doesn't have one specific overarching cybersecurity act like some others. Instead, they rely mainly on their existing Electronic Information and Transactions Law, the EIT law, for rules against cybercrimes like hacking and phishing. It's an older law, but still their primary tool. However, their newer personal data protection law, the PDP law, which kicked in back in 2022, is a huge step on the privacy front. It introduces significant administrative fines, potentially up to 2% of annual income, and even serious criminal penalties, like 4 to 6 years in prison for violations. That marks a major increase in privacy enforcement. Malaysia's Cybersecurity Act 2024, the CSA, just came into force in August 2024. This is their first dedicated, comprehensive cybersecurity law. It broadly regulates what they call national critical information infrastructures, NCIIs, and also cybersecurity service providers. NCII entities now have to conduct annual cyber risk assessments and undergo audits every 2 years by approved auditors, submitting detailed reports within 30 days. That's a significant ongoing compliance burden aimed at lifting the national security posture. Vietnam also has a comprehensive law on cybersecurity. It defines incidents that threaten national security, public order, or individual rights. It puts an obligation on service providers to immediately notify the AO5 MPS, that's part of their Ministry of Public Security, and affected parties during cybersecurity emergencies that cause very serious damage. For other, less severe incidents, notification to the AO5 is still required, but the law is less specific on content or format, creating a bit of ambiguity. Vietnam's Personal Data Protection Decree, the PDIP, also takes a very consent-focused approach to data protection and, importantly, has data localization requirements, meaning certain types of data have to be stored within Vietnam. This creates compliance challenges for global cloud providers and multinationals.
Right. For organizations really striving for accountability and strong data security across this incredibly diverse global landscape, understanding all these varied compliance platforms and legal requirements is just paramount. It's non-negotiable. Resources like www.cisomarketplace.com offer vital tools specifically for CISOs and security professionals managing these risks. And insights from places like www.myprivacy.blog can make a real difference in navigating the complexities and making sure you're protecting critical assets and people's data effectively. It really is a continuous learning process. Okay, we've talked a lot about what governments and companies have to do, their obligations around data protection and cybersecurity. But what about us? What about our rights as individuals, as the data subjects whose personal information is flowing through all these systems? Can we, for example, just ask a company to delete everything they have on us? Especially thinking about those two big frameworks we started with, GDPR in Europe and PDPO in Hong Kong.
Under GDPR, the answer is a pretty strong yes, absolutely. You have this powerful right called the right to erasure, often famously known as the right to be forgotten. It's specified right there in Article 17. This right lets data subjects request deletion of their personal data under certain conditions. Like, if the data is no longer needed for the reason it was collected, or if you withdraw the consent you previously gave, or if you object to the processing and the company doesn't have overriding legitimate grounds to keep it. It's considered a fundamental right. It's designed to give individuals significant control over their digital footprint. It's really a testament to the idea that you should have agency over your own information. It was pretty groundbreaking when it came in, truly shifting power back towards the individual.
And in Hong Kong, under the PDPO, do individuals there have that same direct, proactive right? Can you just demand deletion, or is that another area where things differ?
This is another really significant point of inconsistency that OneTrust Data Guidance highlights, and it represents a substantial difference in how much control individuals have over their data compared to GDPR. The PPO does not provide data subjects with a specific proactive right to request erasure or deletion of their personal data in the same direct way GDPR does. Now, the PDPO does have provisions related to deleting data. For instance, Section 26 says data shouldn't be kept longer than necessary for the purpose it was used for. But crucially, that's framed as an obligation on the data user, the company, not as a direct right for the individual to initiate the request on demand. So while data might eventually get deleted when its original purpose is finished, the individual doesn't have that same immediate power to force its deletion like they would under GDPR. It means less direct agency for the individual in Hong Kong in this specific regard.
That's a really stark contrast, isn't it, in terms of empowering individuals over their data? A critical difference for anyone trying to manage their digital footprint. What about the right just to know what data a company holds about you? The right of access, is that more consistent across these two frameworks, or do we see similar gaps there too?
On this point, thankfully, there's more similarity. Both GDPR under Article 15 and PDPO under Section 19 provide for a right of access. GDPR details quite extensively what information has to be given back to the data subject, the purposes of the processing, the categories of data being processed, who the data has been or will be disclosed to, how long they plan to store it, and even reminding you about your other rights like correction or erasure. It's meant to be a comprehensive picture. The PDPO sets out similarly extensive requirements. It obliges data users to comply with a data access request within 40 days. They have to tell the requester in writing if they hold their data and provide a copy of it. Interestingly, though, a practical difference does emerge here. The PDPO allows data users to charge a fee for complying with an access request, as long as that fee isn't excessive. GDPR, in contrast, generally mandates that the first copy of your data should be provided free of charge, although companies can charge a reasonable fee for further copies, or if requests are clearly unfounded or excessive. So GDPR generally makes access a bit more readily available without a direct financial barrier up front.
Okay, so the right to access is mostly there, but the practical details like potential fees or specific response times can still differ quite a bit. Looking beyond just GDPR and PDPO now, what about other key rights for individuals across the wider Asia-Pacific region? Given how diverse that landscape is, are we seeing a general trend towards more individual empowerment, or are there still significant gaps?
The Drew and Napier LLC report gives a really useful snapshot here. It shows a varied picture, definitely, but the overall trend is towards strengthening individual rights, even if the scope and conditions vary quite a bit from place to place. For instance, in Brunei, their Personal Data Protection Order, PDPO, includes a right of access, Section 18, and a right of correction, Section 19. But these rights have exceptions, like if providing the data would also reveal data about someone else, showing that balance between rights. The Philippines Data Privacy Act, DPA, grants a really comprehensive set of rights. You get the right to object to processing, the right to access, rectification, that's correction, erasure or blocking, data portability, the ability to get your data and move it to another service, and crucially, the right to claim damages if you suffer from unlawful processing. That's a very strong package. Indonesia's PDP law gives rights to object, access data within a pretty quick 72 hours of asking, modify data, and even the right to data portability, letting you get and submit your data to another controller. Though again, there are exemptions for things like national defense or law enforcement, balancing individual rights with state needs. In Myanmar, their electronic transactions law implies rights to access, opt out, and correct data, but it's not as explicitly laid out as in these more comprehensive laws. That can lead to some ambiguity in how it's enforced. Thailand's PDPA lets data subjects object to the processing of their personal data. It also provides for civil liability companies can be sued not just for actual damages caused by noncompliance, but potentially for punitive damages too, which acts as a powerful deterrent. And finally, Vietnam's Personal Data Protection Decree, PDPD, follows that consent-centric approach we mentioned. Data subjects have to be notified before processing starts, with details on purpose, data types, methods, consequences. It also provides rights to access, rectification, erasure, and objection. So yes, while the specifics vary widely across the region, the overarching direction is definitely towards giving individuals more transparency, more control, and more ability to exercise rights over their own personal data.
Okay, it's one thing to have these rights written down in law, but it's another thing entirely for them to be effectively enforced and for organizations to be genuinely held accountable when they mess up. How do these different laws make sure companies are accountable? And what are the real consequences for non-compliance? Because without real teeth, rights can sometimes feel a bit hollow.
Accountability is absolutely the cornerstone of any strong data protection framework. And it's here we see some really dramatic differences in philosophy and approach. Under GDPR, Article 5.2 explicitly makes accountability a core principle. This means controllers aren't just responsible for complying with the data protection principles, they also have to be able to demonstrate that compliance. This translates into needing extensive record keeping, strong internal policies, regular audits proof, essentially. And for violations, GDPR imposes potentially severe administrative fines. These can go up to 20 million, or 4% of the company's total worldwide annual turnover from the previous year, whichever amount is higher. That's stated in Article 83.5. This is deliberately designed to be a very significant, potentially company-altering deterrent. It reflects how seriously the EU takes data protection. It's not just about encouraging compliance, it's about making non-compliance prohibitively costly, especially for large organizations.
Wow, 4% of global turnover. That's a truly staggering potential fine, clearly a massive motivator for big companies to get it right. How does Hong Kong's PDPO compare on penalties and this whole idea of accountability? Are we talking about anything near that scale of consequence?
This is where that fairly inconsistent rating pops up for accountability, and it's rated flat out inconsistent for monetary penalties. Now, PDPO certainly implies accountability throughout its rules, and it definitely outlines liabilities for data users. But it doesn't explicitly list accountability as one of its 6 core data protection principles in that same overarching, explicit way GDPR does. And the fines. They are significantly, dramatically smaller. For a general breach of one of the data protection principles, the typical fine is HKD 10,000. That's roughly, 1,060 time? For more serious offenses, like certain violations related to direct marketing, the penalties can go up to HKD 500,000, around 52,000 NIDR, and potentially 3 years in jail. But crucially, and this is the major divergence, the PDPO does not have any provision for sanctions based on a percentage of a company's turnover. This is a key difference from GDPR's punitive financial model. It means that for a large multinational corporation, the maximum fine they might face in Hong Kong is just a tiny fraction of what they could potentially face in Europe for a similar breach. This inevitably alters the perceived risk and the incentive structure for investing heavily in compliance.
Right. Beyond just the fines and the principles of accountability, what about the practical side of data security rules? And critically, what happens when a data breach actually occurs? Are companies legally required to tell individuals if their data has been compromised? Or is that often left up to their own judgment?
Data security is obviously paramount, and this is another area with really stark differences between the two. GDPR, under Article 32, mandates that organizations must implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure security that's proportionate to the risk. This means things like encryption, access controls, regular testing, security audits, a whole range of practices. And significantly, GDPR requires strict data breach notifications. Controllers must notify their supervisory authority, the regulator, within 72 hours of becoming aware of a breach, according to Article 33. Furthermore, if the breach is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of the affected individuals, think risk of identity theft, financial fraud, etc., then those individuals must also be notified without undue delay, as per Article 34. This transparency is about empowering people to protect themselves. The PDPO, on the other hand, sets out general security requirements in its 4th data protection principle, DPP4, but these are relatively high level compared to GDPR's specifics. More importantly, unlike GDPR, the PDPO does not include mandatory data breach notification requirements in the law itself. Now, the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data, PCPD, in Hong Kong has published guidance recommending and encouraging voluntary notification when breaches happen, but it's not a legal obligation to notify either the regulator or the affected individuals. This difference is flagged as starkly inconsistent. It puts much more of the burden on the individual in Hong Kong to somehow become aware if their data has been compromised, rather than relying on proactive notification from the organization holding the data.
Okay, so who actually polices all of this in these different places? Who are the watchdogs making sure companies comply and enforcing these rules?
Both GDPR, Article 51, and PDPO establish independent data protection authorities, or DPAs. They share general similarities. Both are given powers to investigate complaints, order corrective actions, and provide advice and guidance. However, the specifics of their tasks and the breadth of their powers do vary. GDPR supervisory authorities, for example, seem to have a broader mandate. They can issue formal opinions, approve codes of conduct and certification mechanisms, actively fostering a wider ecosystem of compliance and best practices across the entire EU. They play a more harmonizing role. The Hong Kong Commissioner certainly has significant powers. They can carry out investigations, issue enforcement notices compelling organizations to fix problems, and liaise with international bodies. Both play an absolutely crucial role in monitoring compliance and handling complaints within their respective legal systems. But the GDPR framework arguably empowers its authorities with a wider set of tools to proactively shape the data protection landscape across the board.
And If an individual actually suffers harm because a company violated these laws, maybe they lose money, or even just suffer significant distress, can they sue the company for compensation?
Yes. Both frameworks do allow for individuals to seek civil remedies, but again, there are some nuances. GDPR, in Article 82, explicitly states that any person who has suffered material or non-material damage as a result of an infringement has the right to receive compensation. That non-material part is key. It acknowledges harm isn't always financial. It can include things like emotional distress or reputational damage. The PDPO, under Section 66(1), similarly establishes grounds for an individual who suffers damage, which includes injury to feelings, due to a contravention to seek compensation from the data user responsible. However, the PDPO is maybe less explicit about potential exceptions from liability compared to GDPR, which allows a controller or processor to be exempt if they can prove they were not in any way responsible for the event giving rise to the damage. The practicalities of proving damage and establishing the causal link can also differ in court.
What about Malaysia's PDPA again, thinking about accountability and breach notification? It sounds like they do have a DPO requirement, which feels like a step closer to that GDPR model of proactive governance.
They absolutely do. Malaysia's PDPA, under the newer Section 12A, requires both data controllers and data processors to appoint data protection officers, DPOs. This is particularly mandated if their processing involves high risk or deals with sensitive personal data on a significant scale. This clearly shows Malaysia moving towards a more proactive, internally responsible approach to data governance, recognizing the value of specialized expertise within organizations. And for data breaches, the PDPA requires notification to their commissioner within 72 hours of having reason to believe a breach has occurred. Furthermore, and this is crucial for individuals, the affected data subjects themselves must also be notified without unnecessary delay, and definitely no later than 7 days after the commissioner notification, if the breach is likely to result in significant harm. And significant harm is defined to include things like physical harm, financial loss, potential misuse for illegal purposes, or if sensitive personal data is involved, or even if the breach affects more than 1,000 people. This puts Malaysia squarely in line with the more robust and transparent breach notification standards we see elsewhere, empowering individuals to react quickly to protect themselves.
This whole complex web of rules, different roles like DPOs, varying enforcement mechanisms, it really seems to be constantly shifting and evolving. New details, new interpretations emerging all the time. It must be incredibly challenging for organizations just to keep track, let alone comply perfectly everywhere.
Indeed. It really underscores the global challenge of trying to harmonize data protection. You see these varying levels of detail, the presence or absence of key roles like DPOs, wildly different approaches to breach notification and financial penalties. Each jurisdiction is fundamentally trying to protect its citizens and its critical digital systems. That's the common goal. But the methods they choose, the priorities they set, the legal traditions they build on, they all reflect local political landscapes and histories. It means organizations and individuals alike just have to stay vigilant, constantly learning and adaptable to these dynamic changes. A misstep in compliance in one region could easily have ripple effects globally, making holistic, informed compliance not just a legal necessity, but a core strategic imperative.
Absolutely. For organizations really striving for that accountability and robust data security across this incredibly diverse global picture, understanding these varied compliance platforms and legal requirements is just paramount. It's essential. Resources from www.cisomarketplace.com offer tools specifically designed to help manage cybersecurity risks. www.compliancehub.wiki is built to help track these evolving legal mandates and make sure your privacy posture is strong. And for really staying ahead of the curve on what's coming next, www.myprivacy.blog offers invaluable insights into the latest global privacy trends and debates. These aren't just websites, they're becoming essential lifelines for navigating this digital complexity effectively. #outro.
Well, we've just navigated a pretty fascinating and definitely intricate deep dive into the world of data privacy and cybersecurity. We span from the nitty-gritty details comparing Europe's GDPR and Hong Kong's PDPO right out to the broader, often quite fragmented but clearly rapidly evolving landscape across the entire Asia-Pacific region.
We've peeled back the layers and seen how fundamental things like how you even define personal data, who's responsible for it, how you transfer across borders, and even what rights we have as individuals can vary so significantly. It genuinely creates this kind of global maze for organizations trying to operate compliantly everywhere and for all of us just trying to protect our digital lives.
Yeah, what really stands out, I think, is that common underlying goal, protecting data, protecting critical systems, but then these vastly different regulatory philosophies and enforcement tools being used to try and achieve it. You've got GDPR's proactive, risk-based approach with those potentially huge turnover-based fines. Then you have Hong Kong's PDPO, which
Yeah.
is more localized and in some key areas like breach notification or erasure rights, less prescriptive. And then across Southeast Asia, you see this mosaic of emerging cybersecurity laws, some very robust, others raising potential human rights questions. It's crystal clear that navigating this space demands constant attention, vigilance, and adaptation. There's just no single silver bullet solution here. It requires really understanding each specific jurisdiction's unique legal and political context.
So what does all this mean for you? Whether you're listening as a business leader making strategic calls or just as a digital citizen going about your daily online life. In a world where our data is constantly flowing, where cyber threats are getting more sophisticated by the day, and where the regulations are continuously shifting under our feet, the responsibility for privacy and security doesn't just sit with governments or corporations anymore. It's also about our collective awareness, isn't it? Our proactive engagement. What role do you play in advocating for stronger data protection where you are? In demanding transparency from the companies that hold your information? And in adapting your own digital habits in this complex, ever-changing environment? The push for a truly harmonized, human rights-respecting digital future continues. It happens one regulation at a time and one informed individual at a time. Your awareness, your questions, they're actually a powerful form of defense in themselves.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we just want to reiterate how crucial it is to stay informed and properly equipped in this complex digital world. For further support in navigating compliance challenges, understanding these intricate cybersecurity frameworks, and staying right up to date on the very latest privacy trends and debates, we highly recommend exploring our sponsors' resources: www.cisomarketplace.com, www.compliancehub.wiki, and www.myprivacy.blog. These platforms really offer the practical tools and the invaluable insights that are necessary not just to survive, but hopefully to thrive in today's demanding digital landscape. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.